project number 3, non-technical audience. The objectives are to understand the principles of communicating complex information to non-technical listeners, to build and deliver an interesting talk based on these principles, answer audience questions that arise during the presentation, and to use a Microsoft PowerPoint slideshow. He's preparing that now. Our third speaker today is Telchin. Bud is a mechanical engineer and IT consultant, helping clients deal with risks associated with technology. Bud is also a former VP of education of this club. Today's speech will address ways to do better in getting our population and leaders up to speed when facing today's science and technology issues. Bud will have Q&A session if time permits. Ready? Please help me welcome Bud with the speech title, "The Solution Isn't Rocket Science." Or is it?
America, we have a problem. We have a range of technology that we're depending upon that we cannot control. This affects climate change, it affects genetic engineering, it affects cyber security, data confidentiality, and just as another example, artificial intelligence. Madam Toastmaster, fellow Rough Riders, and very welcome guests. Look at this list again. These are the things that are affecting our lives that we don't know a whole lot about. And our elected representatives in Congress, in the Senate, in the Oval Office, they don't know a lot about these things either, from the technology and the science levels. We need to do something about this. For example, with artificial intelligence, a couple of months ago, an Indonesian airliner had an artificial intelligence sensor that malfunctioned. It sent the plane into a dive by mistake. The pilot wasn't familiar with how to override this thing, and the plane crashed into the ocean with a loss of life of everyone on board. What a horrible situation for trusting artificial intelligence before it was ready. And the same thing is happening with self-driving cars and a whole range of other things. A solution to this is that we have to enhance the STEM education in this country. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. And how do we do that? Well, you might say, well, how much of a problem is there? Really, it's not that much of a problem. But the fact is that where does the U.S. stand against other countries in the world with respect to, say, science? Our science ranking is, guess what?
Dismal.
We're roughly 20th in the world. Wow. That means there are 19 other countries that have higher performance scores in science than the United States does. What an embarrassment. Well, how about for math? We must be better than that. Well, it turns out it's even worse. We're 30th in the world. But yet we're sitting back and thinking that, well, this is fine, this is acceptable, we don't need to do anything dramatically different. Obviously we do. I don't have an answer for the whole thing, but I think one of the problems has to do with role models. And in particular, kids in grade school and high school and college who study math and science are not cool. Who is cool in our society? Well, we've got plenty of sports figures. We've got movie stars. We've got singers of all stripes. They're the people that everyone admires and that we should all be like, right? Now, I don't have anything against Tom Brady or LeBron James or Lady Gaga, okay? But what about Matt Taylor? You say, who? Matt Taylor? Who is he? Say, well, 4 years ago, Matt Taylor led a team that accomplished one of the greatest intellectual, scientific, and engineering feats in the last 100 years. And you say, what did he do? Okay. He led a project called the Rosetta mission. It was funded by the European Space Agency, not NASA, but the European Space Agency that designed and built and launched a spacecraft called the Rosetta that went out. It found a comet called Comet CP-67, almost 1 billion miles from Earth, caught up to it, was able to go into orbit around it, perform all kinds of scientific experiments, send data back to the country, and then sent a lander down onto the surface of this comet. This was unheard of. We had never done this before. We've gone past comets before, but never orbited or sent a lander onto the surface of a comet that happened to be moving at, guess what speed? 34,000 miles an hour.
Wow.
Okay? That's what Matt Taylor did. And what was the reception to this? Were there parades down Broadway for this accomplishment? No, there weren't. It made the 11 o'clock news for one day. It made the New York Times for one day, and various other publications and so forth. But it didn't get very much acclaim, and there was probably very little support in the schools to discuss this as a major accomplishment. Okay? Let's take a look at what was actually involved here. This spacecraft, this represents the Sun, the Earth, and Mars, and the Rosetta spacecraft and the Comet CP-67. Here's what the comet looks like. It's really an ugly, ducky kind of thing. It's beyond your imagination. This thing is about 2.5 miles long and 1.5 miles across. Okay? That's pretty big for a piece of rock and ice that's out there in space, but it's tiny. It's really tiny for something that you're going to try to find that's 600 billion miles away. Okay? And here's what the spacecraft itself looked like. This is about 6 foot by 6 foot, just for scale. The solar panels, the communication dish, and here's the little lander called Philae that was ejected from the spacecraft to go down to the surface of the comet. Okay? And the amazing thing was, in November of 2014, the spacecraft caught up with the comet, went into orbit around it, and a couple of months later, when everything settled down, they sent the Philae lander down, and it successfully landed on the surface of this comet. Wow, what an accomplishment. But to help get the word out on this, okay, as an example of what STEM technology can be and what your role can be in furthering it, I'm going to deputize every one of you in this room to be a deputy rocket scientist to go out and tell your family and friends and colleagues about this event. I challenge you to do this. And this will start a groundswell of people who want to embrace STEM technology so that we can deal with those issues that we looked at first, and we know how to talk to people who are candidates for office, people who want to be senators or congressmen or presidents, because we will then have more of a background in STEM technology. Okay. Now, you say to me, but I don't know beans about rocket science or all this stuff you're talking about with landers and all that. And I realize that I only have a few minutes to get you up to speed on these things, but let's do it. Let's look at the biggest challenge that Matt Taylor was facing. When he launched the Rosetta spacecraft, it was going 18,000 miles an hour, which is really fast, isn't it?
Mm.
That's back and forth to California 6 times in 1 hour. Wow.
Wow.
18,000 miles an hour. But, like I said, the Comet was going 34,000 miles an hour. So how do you boost the speed? So that's where the biggest challenge came in for this entire project. They had to figure out, how are we going to boost the speed of the spacecraft? So does anyone have any ideas how they might have done that? Well, yes?
Use the gravity of the comet.
Okay,
The
good idea.
gravitational pull.
Okay, and that's a great suggestion. All right. What we're going to do is look at, how do we get from a lower speed to a higher speed? It's like if you're in your car going 20 miles an hour and you want to go to 60. You step on the gas and you feel pushed back in the seat because you're accelerating. Your velocity is changing from 20 to 60. That's called acceleration. And acceleration requires a force to make that happen. And fortunately, we have a couple of equations that we got not just a few years ago, but from 300 years ago, from Isaac Newton. He came up with the first equation: force equals mass times acceleration. Okay? A variation on that is acceleration equals force over mass. So if we want to get some more acceleration, we need some force. And where do we get that from? One approach would be to burn fuel, but we couldn't carry enough fuel in this spacecraft. Okay? So then the second approach is to use gravity assist. Okay? And this is a trick that's been used for quite a few years to get spacecraft increase their velocity. So what they did was just amazing. I mean, part of the formula is the product of the two masses, but Isaac Newton took away something from this. He said, no, you can't, that's not going to be enough. It depends on the distance as well between the two objects. And in fact, it's the square of the distances. So the net of it is that even if we send the spacecraft towards Mars, it will start going faster and faster because it's attracted to Mars. Not a whole lot, but enough so that it keeps building up its speed. So that's what happened. Okay? That the way they did it is they launched it from Earth, sent it around the sun, being very careful not to hit the sun. So it picked up a lot of speed from that, came back to the Earth, then went out to Mars. Wow. Took about 2.5 years to get to Mars, came very close to Mars without hitting it, looped around Mars, came back past the Earth, got even faster, went around the sun, then went around the Earth twice more to pick up more and more speed. You imagine the intellect to be able to plan that and to make it happen. So then it finally went out on its mission. It was now going fast enough to catch up with the comet, and that's what it did. On November 2014, as we said, it reached the comet and performed the experiments that I described earlier. So that's this great accomplishment. So please go out and spread the word that STEM technology can lead to marvelous accomplishments, maybe even more than LeBron James can.
So because of that, thank you, but our Broadcast meeting continues and we get smarter and smarter. Now we are coming to the last speaker today. Our speaker number 4 has been looking into present his personal speech for some